friends and enemies. Welcome back to the Canadian Bitcoiners podcast, a rare Friday afternoon stream. I'm going to be joined today by the Honorable Stockwell Day. We have a lot to talk about. Alberta versus Ottawa, obviously in the news. The election we just had, a surprise, I think, to many Canadians, certainly on the right. I include myself in those ranks. I'm sure many of you do too. And of course, we have to talk about energy, the Trump effect, and a number of other things that are on everyone's mind, honestly. And Bitcoiners are no different in that regard. But first, as always, the sponsors. EasyDNS, the best place for you to buy, host, register a domain. Mark is your friendly neighborhood registrar. He's been a sponsor of the show for a long time, friend of mine for a long time. And we hope that you guys will get to know Mark as well. If you're a Bitcoiner, tons of options over there, a suite of virtual private server stuff, including Bitcoin nodes, Nostr relays, BTC pay servers, all of that. Plus, for a few extra bucks, you get easy mail, domain sure. A lot of people gunning for your data these days. We talk about that a lot on Axis of Easy, the other podcast that Len and I do. And it's starting to creep into the Bitcoin space too. Lots of talk about leaked addresses leading to break and enters. I just read today that the recent Muskoka area highway shutdown was due to a robbery of a crypto guy gone wrong. So there you go. They tortured the guy in his house for 2 days, apparently. Interesting. You can protect yourself from all these things, or at least help yourself by using EasyDNS and all these things that Mark offers. Go over. CBP Media is the promo code, 50% off your first round of buys. You guys know that. Second sponsor is Bull Bitcoin. Bitcoin is at an all-time high-ish. 118,000 US per coin. There's no better time to start stacking harder than right now. There hasn't been a Trump era rate cut yet. We're on the cusp-ish of recession. Canada adding 83,000 jobs last month. They failed to mention, of course, in the media that 70,000 of them were part-time. So you're on the brink of, I think, a significant liquidity injection. Obviously, the big, beautiful bill passing in the States last week as well. We are due for a big run. And if you're not a Bitcoiner yet, you can go to Bull Bitcoin, use our promo code CBP, or click the link in the description. I think it's in there. 25% off your fees on the platform. For the rest of your life, you can't beat that. I'm going to bring in our guest now, the Honorable Stockwell Day. Mr. Day, it's a great pleasure to have you on. I'm glad we were able to set this up. I want to start by asking you how you're doing on this fine day.
Doing fine. Coming to you from sunny downtown Vancouver, and things are good. Lots of stuff going on. You know, a lot of it's positive, some is not, but trying to stay focused and getting some things done.
I'm glad to hear that. Yeah, I think we're all in the same boat, right? There is a lot going on. I'll agree with you there. Maybe, Stockwell, for my listeners, I'm 38 this year, so I remember you from your sort of political heyday in the early aughts. I can still remember Stockwell Day signs in my neighborhood. I can still remember seeing you on TV. But a lot of our viewers skew young, 20 to 25, maybe late 20s. It might be best to tell people, who is Stockwell Day, and why should a 20-year-old be paying attention to what Stockwell Day has to say?
Well, if you're 20 years old, then you should be paying attention because your parents probably talk about me. I do run into 20-somethings all the time who say, hey, you know what, my mom, my dad, or my grandpa dragged me out to one of your meetings when you were going back and forth across the country, and that was my first exposure to politics. So it's a lot of fun catching up with people, some who, 20 years old, wouldn't have been alive when we first went federal. But just to give a quick thumbnail, I'll go from 30,000 feet and you can drill down as much as you want. Was involved first in provincial politics with the government of Alberta. Was eventually Minister of Finance for the province of Alberta. And then I was approached by some people in the year 2000 who've been constantly frustrated with the conservative, small c conservative vote, constantly splitting for years between Reform Party and the federal Conservatives. And could we launch a project? Let's try and pull these two parties together and start winning the election where most people wanted to be, because the Liberals would always win with a minority of the vote. So that was the Canadian Alliance Party, and we registered and we went coast to coast. I was the Reform Party folded up intentionally to try and get this project off the ground. And I won the leadership of the new Canadian Alliance Party. Jean Chrétien was prime minister at the time. He launched right into an election. We did increase our seats, we increased the votes, and we increased our popularity across the country. But much as Pierre Poilievre is finding out right now, sometimes that's not enough to get the election done. Following that, we did the whole exercise again, and Stephen Harper won the next time. To his credit, ran a great race. I came second, supported him going into the next election. The Progressive Conservative Party federally then folded up, and as had the Reform Party, and we folded up the Canadian Alliance, and it became the Conservative Party of Canada for the first time in, well, ever, I guess. With Stephen Harper leading, he went on to become prime minister. Thankfully, I served in his cabinet first as Minister of Public Safety, that's in charge of RCMP and CSIS, the intelligence forces, the borders, our prisons. And after that, I was Minister of International Trade and then president of what's called the Treasury Board, which is that huge organization that tries to get all the regulations in the world running together so that people can survive without getting suffocated. I stepped down once Stephen Harper got the majority in 2011, which I was delighted with. We worked hard on that campaign, and I've been in the private sector ever since. There's your snapshot, and you can drill down for a closer look at anything you want along the way.
Okay, Stockwell, I have to say, we turn down a lot of politicians on this show because I generally view politicians as guarded, and the polite way to put it, my friend, would be to say they are too media savvy to give me honest answers, regardless of their level of experience. And I do think you have that same savvy. I listened to that resume, and Bitcoiners their ears will perk up at this portfolio that you've had your hands in over the years. Security, key now. You were the treasurer of Alberta, key now. And the number of different places that you've been able to see, not from 30,000 feet, but on the ground, critical at this time. So why don't we start with Alberta, separatism, equalization. There's a kind of a large file here that I think has come into view for a lot of Canadians for the first time. Certainly people my age and younger didn't really deal with a strong, outwardly vocal separatist movement until the last few years. Premier Smith now, I think, embracing it in a lot of ways, even though Pierre Poilievre did not. We'll get to him later in the show. Talk to me a bit about the era in which Ottawa decided that Alberta was going to play second fiddle to quote unquote national interests and suffer a little bit. Obviously, they've had energy projects derailed. You've had an energy project recently derailed by Ottawa, you could say. When did this start? And in your view, why did it start?
Great question, Joy. And you know what? Well, thanks for asking that question, and thanks for asking me on the show. Really like to get feedback from folks like yourself. You know what? This started, viewers might know, or listeners might know or not know, depending on what you've been taught in school. Canada, or Alberta, didn't join Canada until 1905. The first four provinces jumped in 1867. So Alberta and some of the other Western provinces really held off for a while. There was this mistrust of, what was going on with the central bankers, so-called even then. This is over 100 years ago. And would Alberta be crushed? Would its interest be crushed by the big banks, etc.? Anyway, Alberta joins in 1905. And really, it's been a somewhat painful relationship ever since. Albertans love Canada. I love Canada. In the years of the Great Depression, going back to 1929 into the early 30s, Alberta was dying. Alberta businesses and farms were not able to get money from, as we said then, the big banks in central Canada. And one project they launched it was very interesting, a project, this may sound interesting to you, with some similarities to Bitcoin. What we said to Ottawa was, well, look, we're going to come up with our own currency here that will be valid tender in Alberta, because frankly, the banks have cut us off. We're dying here, and literally in some cases. And we're not asking for help from Ottawa, and we're not talking about separating. but we think we can take care of our own citizens with our own coinage, if you want to say. That got shut down by Ottawa, got shut down by the Supreme Court. And this is a cycle that's gone on, for almost 100 years, definitely since the 30s. And then I saw it all happen again in vivid, gory detail when Pierre Trudeau, the father of Justin, became prime minister. And Albertans were just then struggling to their feet. In 1947 was the first time oil was discovered in Alberta. And all of a sudden, oh my goodness, hardworking people who are not asking anything from Ottawa were going to be able to get on their feet and also take care of the world in terms of energy needs. And things really went well for a number of years. I'm abbreviating here in Alberta. And then we got into the Pierre Trudeau era, and Eastern Canada, at least in the view of a lot of Albertans at the time, was not liking what they were seeing. We were seeing company headquarters moving to Calgary, moving to Edmonton. We were seeing Albertans working everywhere, not just the oil and gas industry, but that was spinning off into all kinds of high-tech stuff. We were seeing agriculture, because now the products that come out of the ground, which include fertilizer, are able to help the livestock industry, help the agriculture industry, grains and pulses and everything else. And that's when Pierre Trudeau came in with what's called the National Energy Program, bought out what is now called Petro-Canada, but at that time owned by the federal government. This was horrifying to anybody who had even a molecule in their body that said business should be doing business and let government take care of government. And that became the days and the years of strangulation, and the national energy policy did not let Alberta have free will in terms of being able to sell their product at a world rate, and yet still take care of Canadians. Once again, we saw Albertans getting crushed, and I mean crushed horrifically in terms of small business. I can tell you, though I won't go into detail, I mean, we're talking about suicide rates, young families that had started out and investing everything in either energy or the spin-offs that come from energy. It was just devastation. It was a war zone economically. And so that again triggered, at that time there was very high feelings about the association with Canada. That was the first time a separatist candidate was elected in Alberta provincially. The Liberals finally, Pierre Trudeau, even the media wasn't able to write glowing stories about him. And the Conservatives, federal Conservatives, win an election federally. And life got breathed back into Alberta. But it's been this continuing cycle of Alberta's interests, and not just Alberta, at times Saskatchewan, at times Manitoba, and even British Columbia, continually getting crushed. That's happening again now, we see with over the last few years, with an unscientific approach to what is happening in the climate. And we all want a good and favorable climate. We all have, or most of us have kids and grandkids. But the exaggeration internationally, coming out of the UN, coming out of the EU, once again, crushing in a very unscientific way the prospects of energy, and Albertans feeling it again. So, that's all given rise again to this sentiment that Alberta would do better on its own. That got intertwined in this last election. We can talk about that with what people saw coming out of the US and this language about a 51st state. But that's sort of, especially for your young viewers and listeners, it's been a heartbreak relationship where Albertans who love Canada in both world wars signed up in per capita numbers at higher rates than anywhere else in Canada, have paid the price. And frankly, there's a growing number of Albertans who are tired of continuing to pay the price. And now we have the question, are there enough of them to actually cause a vote to happen that would look for secession or separation? That's kind of where we're at right now.
I do want to talk about the secession vote, but there's a thread there I want to pull on a bit. The idea, again, like I'm not going to necessarily point the finger at Ottawa writ large. I think there's policies and just a lot of momentum and inertia that's difficult to stop because we adopted, Greta Thunberg's climate policy 10 years ago or whatever that was. Why is it in your view that Ottawa doesn't seem able to grasp that Alberta's interests are Canada's interests when it comes to energy? Every Canadian puts gas in their car. Every Canadian heats their home. Every Canadian benefits from other products, like you mentioned, fertilizer. I mean, it's rubbers, clothing, consumables, text, you name it, Stockwell. And I have a hard time, again, like I was born in the 80s. A lot of my friends now are coming to the same realization that you certainly have already arrived at, I've arrived at, that there's a balance between climate action and, you know, a prosperous way of life, and energy is often the fulcrum on which those two things you know, exist. Why has Ottawa been unable to grasp this? And do you think there's any hope with the current kind of liberal administration, liberal policy set, that this will change in the next, you know, 10 years, 5 years? I don't know.
Yeah, that's a great perspective and hope. I mean, I'm a person of hope. I'm optimistic, but you know what they say? They say the difference between an optimist and a pessimist is that the pessimist usually has more information. So, you know, that's kind of where we're at. And it's not that Ottawa or Central Canada is unable to grasp it. I think there's many people who are unable to grasp it, and they simply buy into this package, you know, that if unless we shut off all energy right now, the world will end, you know, in 2028 at 9 o'clock in the morning, 9:30 in Newfoundland. And you know, they've been wrongly convinced. There is a deep-seated impulse that exists, and the DNA is there historically. It's been existing for a long time. That Central Canada, and we call them the Laurentian elite, simply want to control everything. And all of a sudden, here comes this fabulous way to actually maybe really shut down the energy industry in Alberta and in Western Canada. And you do it by convincing people that we're all going to die unless we keep everything in the ground. To show you how extreme this is, I used to teach a course at Concordia University. I was there for teaching. It was a short course, and it was to students who were sort of mid-20s, and they were pursuing either masters of business or masters of political administration. So I'll give you a quick snapshot there. So the faculty would ask me, would say to come and, you know, explain to students in a 1 or 2 day course the nexus between government and then they'd pick the issue. So the issue this particular year, not that many years ago, was energy. The class those days was about 27, 28 people in the class, super smart people in their mid 20s, really wanting to do the right thing and looking forward to a future. So I went around the room, first of all, and I said to them, in 1 or 2 sentences, tell me what should happen with, in your view, with the energy industry. Of the 28 people, Joey, 25 said, I just let each one of them talk, gave them a couple minutes each. 25 said, shut everything into the ground now. And I knew I'd get some pushback. I didn't think, and these are smart people, right? These are smart young people and sincere. And they had been convinced that literally the world was coming to an end. And I said, do you have any idea what we mean by shutting in all energy now? Natural gas, gas, petrochemicals. Do you realize that the knapsacks on the desks in front of you that you walked in here with are made from petroleum project? Do you realize the bicycles that you rode to class today, largely made from petroleum products? The pharmaceuticals in your knapsacks are made from, petroleum products. Do you have any idea the screens that you're using on your devices, the laptops that you're checking me, fact checking me with every word I say as with this class? Everything. Do you realize what and on employment alone, what that would do in terms of crushing the country? I'm telling you, the response was, we don't care.
That's
Shut it
insane.
all in now. It was, I'm not easily shocked. That would shock me. To their credit, and a 2 day class, you know, we had, I produced lots of evidence, and it was very good. We recognized we had differences of opinion, but we had great debate. By the end of the first day, I think I had convinced another 4 or 5 that that wasn't the way to go. So that's how deep seated it is. There's those who aren't willing to believe it because of what they've taught. But the other part of it, and it's significant, is those who want control to stay in central Canada. We're saying this is a way to shut it down. We just bury it. We tell people it's killing us. And so it's that combination of two impulses. One is a deliberate attempt, once again, just to maintain tight financial control in the center of the country. And the other is people who've been absolutely convinced to the place where emotionally they can hardly even discuss the issue. I think that's changing a little bit, but it's slow, and that's kind of how we got there.
The information environment in Canada is unique, I think, in a lot of ways. You know, when I think about the United States, their national sort of public radio, NPR, is viewed sort of organically as an elitist outfit, I think. Here in Canada, when I think about the CBC and other state-funded media outlets, of which there are plenty, Toronto Star, you know, there's conservative and liberal media outlets alike that take a great deal of government subsidy, as was a topic during the election. I don't know if you have a view on this. I'd love to hear it if you do. How does Canada, specifically the young people in Canada, get out from underneath this avalanche of what it sounds like you think is bad information, at least on climate? I think it's bad information on climate and a million other things, from diet to where you should be going to school, to what jobs are going to be there in 10 years, to whether or not the pension is performing well. You know, all this information I think is bad and is coming from subsidized media. How do you view the media landscape in Canada? This is something, obviously, as a politician, you've considered a great deal. What about now as a, you know, an older politician who maybe is looking at this from the outside instead of from inside the party?
Well, unfortunately, or fortunately, still looking at it also very much from the inside, because I'm, involved politically. I just did a fundraiser for the federal conservatives in Victoria, of all places. It was very well attended, and the crowd was pumped, and, contrary to what media might be saying. So we got to take a step back again. I think the historical context is important. What shall we say, the world view from the West. And when I say the West, some people say, you hear in the media, well, the view of the West, or Western culture, or Western views. I'm not talking about, the Calgary Stampede or the Pinocchio Rodeo here when I say the West. And I don't say this in a way looking down at anybody, but these terms are important to understand. The view, the terminology of the West actually goes way back, right back, from the time of Christ, actually about 2,000 years. And what we saw was with the Christian movement starting and moving at that time, this is over 2,000 years ago, across and through the Roman Empire. And it moved east and west, and it went east as far as, we finally there was a Roman emperor. I'm going to try and do this quickly, but I think it's important to understand the roots, by the name of Constantine. So the part of the Roman Empire in Rome itself had basically fallen, become corrupt, no democracy, financial control by a few elite, locking up people who had dissenting views. Does this sound familiar? So Rome itself was being constantly invaded by bands. I don't mean rock bands, but some cool names like the Vandals and the Visigoths. And so Constantine becomes emperor, and he also became a Christian. And so he's got a little different worldview, and he thinks the individual is now important. And the very beginnings of the importance of individual rights actually start with Christianity, talking about there is one God. That also ticked off the Romans because the emperors want to be called gods. And so some of the most basic fundamental rights that we've got come from the point of view that these Christians, after a few hundred years, were now forming the basis of the empire. Constantine, being a good politician, names a city after himself, Constantinople, and that's at a key waterway to the east. If people can picture, or even Google what I'm talking, picture the Mediterranean, go north a little bit, go a tiny bit east, you'll see the big waterway that actually flows into the Mediterranean. And he forms the city of Constantinople. That becomes the center of the Roman Empire. And really over the next, and then an interesting thing happens. In about the year 700, you have a gentleman by the name of the Prophet Muhammad comes along. He founds the religion of Islam, and everything east then of Constantinople through conquest, pretty vicious military conquest, becomes Islamicized or becomes Muslim, principally through conquest. And it comes as far as, in the year 1400, comes as far as Constantinople as it's moving west. They basically, then Constantinople falls, the city becomes called, at least locally, Istanbul. That name was finally changed to Istanbul formally quite a few centuries later. But that's actually, if people say, well, so when we talk about the West, we're talking about Istanbul, and now move to the west. Everything west. So it would have been the Roman Empire, and then you get France, you get Spain, you get Europe, you get Great Britain. Everything to the west then becomes inundated with what's called the Judeo-Christian worldview, or the Western view. So
Okay.
that's really, and this is where, from that flows in the year 1215 up in England, which had become Christianized also. You get the Magna Carta. That's the first impulses where, people are starting to say, we don't think the king should just run everything. And the lords all get together and call King John and say, you know what, we're not going to fight any more of your battles unless you start recognizing some certain basic rights, like the right of freedom of religion. If you want to be Catholic, you can be Catholic. If you want to be Anglican, you can be Anglican. Stop arresting our people without warrant. And that's actually some of the very beginnings of what we call habeas corpus. To this day, you can't hold someone in jail after you've arrested them unless you charge them, right? Some of these very basic rights flowing out of there. And those rights, again, being transported, whether we like it or not, you can use whatever terminology, but through Europe. And then you have the outreach into what's called the beginnings of the United States over to Canada. So you've got this basically Western view or Judeo-Christian view, which happens to embody and uphold all these individual rights, which involve the right to have a business, involve the right to speak up and say things, even though they were revolting and people started revolutions on them. That began to change. I'm going to kind of wind up this little portion of the tutorial here because I hope we haven't lost anybody, but it's important to understand. And I'll just use one thinker. There were many, but Karl Marx comes along in the late 1800s and writes his manifesto, the Communist Manifesto. So this is Karl Marx. To those of us who are younger and may not have been taught this in school, not the brother of Groucho Marx. And some may even not know who Groucho Marx was. But he writes this, it was ripe for the offering with some totalitarian leaning movements like had taken over in Russia, especially at the time. And here are his main premises. First of all, there is no God. You cannot have religion in government. So that's got to go. Then the family itself is basically an evil construct made just to keep people in subservience. So we've got to we've got to deconstruct family. Then if you don't have family, you really don't need private property. You don't need homes. Government can supply those. So we've got to get rid of the ability to also be entrepreneurial and to be enterprising on your own. Because if you can be enterprising on your own, you can be thinking on your own, and we don't like that. So we've got to move and have business just controlled by government, and government deciding who are going to be the main arbiters of business. And from there, they said, Karl Marx said, and he wrote it out very clearly, there's going to this is going to require a revolution to turn this upside down. I mean, we're deconstructing in a big way. So those who speak up against us are going to have to be eliminated. And we saw this with the forming the Soviet Union. Very clearly, it was wide open strategy, first by Lenin, and we're not talking about John Lennon, the Beatle. We're talking about Vladimir Lenin, and then by Stalin after him. And every communist country since then has recognized if there are going to be people who speak against imposing this centrist view, you've got to eliminate them. And that was done, is well known, recorded. You go into a town or a city, you get into the town square, you get a few people out who've been protesting, maybe some of the academics, maybe some business people, you shoot them in the head in front of everybody else. That'll terrify the masses, and that's how you keep control. It's standard format in every country. So what has happened? Are we still doing that? Do we shoot people in the head? No. but we do cancel them. I know what it's like to
Yeah.
be canceled. It's very public. It involves vicious name calling, and it involves losing your income in significant ways. It's the same process. So what's happened, and what began to happen in early in the 1900s, this culturally Marxist views. Not now. There's still democracy involved, so you can't say you're a communist. But it's now we now live in an era, Joey, of cultural Marxism. We're not communists. We don't shoot people in the head, but we do deconstruct all of these things, whether it's family, whether it's the right to small business, whether it's the right to speak up. And so media themselves, mainstream media, have been brought up, trained, and convinced within a culturally Marxist view. It has largely replaced these Western values that developed over centuries. And it's very powerful. And the people in the media sometimes, talking to conservatives, they get infuriated with people in mainstream media. I say, listen, they can't help themselves.
Mhm.
They've been convinced of a culturally Marxist view. So when they hear, when most people in mainstream media hear a conservative like me talking, all the alarm bells go off. They've been trained for years that it's only an elite few really intelligent people that should be controlling things. And if you have another view, it's harmful to the community. So even when they're talking, so Pierre Poilievre comes along and he's got these views, thankfully. Mainstream media look at him, most, not all, and say he's going to harm the community. This is going to be harmful to this culturally Marxist utopia that we're trying to construct. So rather than debate openly, you have to eliminate. You have to find ways to cancel. And that's to your short, good question. That's a long answer to where we are philosophically in terms of worldviews. It's a clash of two classical worldviews, one being culturally Marxist, one being the Western view, or Judeo-Christian. Obviously, other people of other religions are involved in that. That's what we're up against. And that's why we need, you mentioned NPR, that in the US is funded by those who are of a culturally Marxist view. They hold the tax dollars. And in Canada, it is the CBC and others like it. That's why it's so important. And I tell people, they say, how do we battle this? We have to support independent media. You might not like the view, but you have to support independent media so that people will understand that there are other views out there. Or you have to support shows like yours. You've got to really, what's ironic, I find, Joey, is mainstream media and the formal liberals, I say formal liberals, they all talk about diversity and inclusiveness. Very little notion, very little comfort towards truly diverse views and towards including other views. We just saw a major journalist with CBC finally quitting, talking about the psychological harm that's being inflicted at the board meetings and the journalist meetings at the CBC when you try and introduce other views, or when you suggest let's have another speaker on to interview who maybe isn't swimming in the river of cultural Marxism. So there's what we're up against.
That is an outstanding answer. We on this show, oftentimes, I didn't do this with you pre-show because I kind of knew what I was getting into. I encourage the guests to do what I call roll downhill. That was a masterclass in rolling downhill, what you just gave there. Okay.
Well, thank you.
Absolutely. And I agree with everything you said. My sort of curiosity with the media started when I started doing this show, 4 or 5 years ago with my buddy Len. And the reason that it's become more and more fascinating to me is because I know what it's like to have people refuse to come on your program because they don't share certain views that you have. I know what it's like to have people come on that share only a few of the views you have and may disagree with others. And I know what it's like to have someone comes on that agrees with everything. And it never fails, Stockwell, that the best product for the viewer is the one where there's a broad range of topics covering a broad range of viewpoints that aren't covered in the mainstream. This is the case all the time.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
it's one of the frustrating things to me, and maybe we can segue into some of the financial stuff in Ottawa right now. But the frustrating thing to me is that clearly the public actually doesn't want this either. The public wants something different, and it's evidenced by the number of plays we get or Rogan gets or whoever, not to compare us to Rogan, but the show is popular. And when I look at how much subsidy I get from Ottawa, the answer is a big fat zero. And when I look at how much CBC gets, Torstar and others, mostly left-leaning Marxist, as you mentioned, culturally Marxist publications and outlets get, it's a significant amount. And so that tells me that there's no appetite for that in the general public. And it's frustrating to me to hear that. Now, on the topic of finances, you were the Alberta treasurer. I want to do one more thing in Alberta. And then if you have time, I want to talk a bit about the current state of the Conservative Party.
Sure.
The flat tax you put in as treasurer is still discussed to this day. Right. We have a little Discord for this show. It's like a, community chat room, people asking me about it in private messages in the lead up to this show. Friends of the show that will be watching this program ask me about it in the lead up to this show. They want to know all about this flat tax you put in, and specifically, Mr. Day, why do we not have a flat tax in this great nation? What are we doing with these taxes? 47, I think I saw on Twitter the other day, different ways Canadians are taxed every single day.
Right.
Well, tell me about the flat tax in Alberta. Why are we not doing it nationally?
Boy, that's a great topic. The flat tax is the clarion call for people who really believe that individuals should not be excessively punished for working hard. Yes, everybody's got to pay some taxes. Progressives, liberals, the left, socialists despise with a passion that's almost unimaginable the so-called flat tax, or what we called the single rate tax. And yet workers instinctively know its benefits. I used to work years ago, and this may surprise viewers, long before I was in politics. I had a job at Canada Packers, and I don't want to insult any of our vegetarians here, but I've probably sent more cows to heaven than they could possibly imagine. And I will say in a very humane way, and I say that sincerely, it's instantaneous. But you know what used to bother me? So that was hard work, working on, and I'm sorry to use these words, working on what's called, I don't want to offend anybody, the kill floor. First of all, it's very humane, it's very quick. And but it's hard work because there's people you're skinning and you're watching the health inspectors that are all the time, by the way, and so you're carving up meat into portions that are going to be able to feed the world, and it's hard work. And the foreman would come down the line, and from time to time there'd be extra loads coming in from the various farms, and he'd say, "Hey, can we anybody want to work 4 hours overtime?" I'd always volunteer for that, but many of my colleagues working on the line would say, "No, I don't want to do that." And I'd say, "Guys, it's time and a half." And they'd say, "Yes," but what would they say? "But we'll get pushed into a higher what? Tax bracket." And people know, workers instinctively know that you work harder, you get punished at a higher rate. Nobody minds paying more taxes at the same rate. So the so-called progressive tax is a disincentive right off the bat, and it's killing production. Now, I was sitting with 5 young people. There have been 2 or 3 of them were in their late teens, and 2 or 3 of them in their early 20s. They all were working summer jobs at university. It was like I was hearing myself talk. I don't even know how they vote. I think probably some of them are liberal, maybe NDP. And they all said the same thing. They keep wanting us to work overtime. And I said, "Why don't you?" And they said, "Because we get taxed at a higher rate." That is the nub of it, because socialists and the left do not want anybody thinking that somebody could actually make more money than somebody else. And I am for that, as long as it's done legally. Obviously, we're not talking about illegal, as long as everybody has equal opportunity. So it is despised and it's fought against. Ralph Klein was the premier at the time. A wonderful guy to work with, and he'd actually been a journalist in his younger years, but not a typical journalist. He said, "Look, if you can convince the population of Alberta that we'll do this, we'll do it." We were very excited about that. So I give full credit to Ralph to be open-minded about this. In those days, we didn't have the internet, but I sent out a mailing right across the country. And in one page, we defined what a flat tax was, or a single rate tax, as opposed to progressive, and said, "Would you be interested?" And we got overwhelming response back saying, "Let's do it." And so we brought it in. But the first thing we had to do, we raised the amount of money a low income person could make before they were being taxed at all. That
Ah,
was very important because I was surprised, people working low income, still at the amount in those days, once they were making like $15,000, all of a sudden they're paying taxes. That's not right. That person has got an entry level job. They're trying to get ahead. The socialists keep saying, well, just keep cranking up the minimum wage. Well, I said, well, let's make it $100 an hour. Will that solve the problem? No, because everything else just bumps up accordingly and becomes more expensive. Let them keep more of their hard earned money. So that's what we did first. And then we brought in, first it was 11%, and that everybody was going to pay. It actually wasn't really 100% flat because wealthy people pay a little more because they didn't get that low income break. So I can remember standing in the legislature and being attacked by the NDP about this terrible thing, allowing the so-called rich, to benefit. And I said, look, a constituent of mine has gone to school for almost 20 years and is now a specialist doctor. And many times she is on call and has to, late at night, get down to the emergency and perform give life-saving surgery. So she's been to school for over 20 years. But doing life-saving work many times in the middle of the night. And now I'm using like 1996 numbers here, so your listeners can extrapolate this. I said between me and Paul Martin, who was finance minister at the time, uh, I said she's making around $200,000 a year. Between myself and Paul Martin, we're taking about $100,000 from her right off the top. How much more should we punish her because of the fact she got a little more education and she's willing to work serious overtime? I would say to the socialists, how much more should we punish her? So when we put it in those views, they would back off. And I would really hope to see a revival of this kind of thing. And by the way, people say, oh, there's no flat taxes anywhere in the world. Well, yes, sales tax is a flat tax. Rich or poor, everybody pays. And guess what? The more stuff the rich person buys, the more tax they pay because they're paying the sales tax. Your municipal taxes, it's called a mill rate. That's a flat tax. Guess what? The billionaire who has the mansion and that poor guy or girl who's struggling to put together a little duplex, they pay a flat tax. The flat tax is being paid. Some states are doing it. Your viewers are going to get a kick out of this. The first time I met with President Putin, he'd been newly elected. I was opposition leader in Canada at the time. He and I had one thing in common for which I congratulated him, and he hadn't turned into the monster that he is today. And some of us were predicting maybe he could go that way. Like anybody who's got a background in the KGB, keep at least one eye on them. He had indicated or implemented in Russia a flat tax. It was one of the big reasons their economy was booming because people, first time in their lives, can you imagine this? Having been ruled by communists who absolutely sledgehammered anybody who was making any money, and now they were free to be enterprising. So that was the flat tax. It stayed in place for a number of years. It was fantastic. And I warned my colleagues after I went federal, I warned them, do not abandon the flat tax. Albertans will abandon you. They did abandon it, and Albertans abandoned them. It wasn't the only reason, but we got a NDP government right after that. So there's the history of the single rate tax in Alberta. People loved it. I'll close with this thought, Joey. One of the ways we promoted it also, at that time, there was a hockey player that was being pursued by both the Calgary Flames and the Montreal Canadiens. By the way, we say we own the game. I don't know. It's been over 30 years, but anyway, that's another story. But here's what I did. We took that hockey player. He was being pursued by those two teams. And we said, if he goes to Montreal, here's how much of his paycheck he's going to keep. And it was terrible. They taxed like crazy in Quebec. If he comes to Calgary, look how much he's going to be able to save for his hard work and all his years of training. So there's your view of the single rate tax. yes, in a far, far land, far, far away, it once existed in Canada. I'm hoping someone's going to be brave enough to bring it back, and we'll see individual peoples, individual citizens getting hope back into their hard work again.
You and me both, buddy. I think that's a great idea. Great history there. I'll get you out of here on one last question. It's a big one, but I think you can handle it. The Conservative Party federally, to me, seems to be a tad rudderless at the moment. I think that Poilievre, for all his positives, was beat by now Prime Minister Carney on a short schedule without any real political experience. I do think that Mark Carney proved himself to be quite a stud in front of the media. I will grant you that the media is often friendly to him in a way they were not friendly with Pierre Poilievre.
Right.
And I want to know, in your view, I suppose from inside the party, now that you mentioned the fundraiser, does the Conservative Party view itself as a party that needs to slide more to the right, embrace perhaps the separatist momentum, embrace things like halt on immigration? These things, by the way, I think are sort of common sense policies in my view.
Right.
I may be more to the right than many others are, but I'm curious, what does the federal Conservative Party need to do in your view to return to federal power? It's been, I guess, 12 years, 11 years since Stephen Harper lost to Trudeau in the mid 2010s there. And since then, before Poilievre, I think there was I don't want to say a shortage in charisma, but I think that's what it was a little bit, Stockwell. And I'm curious, what is your view on the current state of the party, and where do they go from here?
Wow. Well, that's great territory to cover. So let me do it. If I go on too long, just, flip the switch.
It's your time, sir. It's your time. You can go as long as you like.
All right. So first of all, for your viewers, and I think they instinctively know this, and you would know this, the undecided in Canada and some other democracies, the undecided generally decide who is going to win the election. The undecided are, I say this respectfully, undecided people on issues usually have a hard time making up their minds about anything or many things. And they usually make up their mind based on whatever the issue is, based on the last person they talk to or the last person they hear from. So, picture this. In Canada, at a federal election, running up to the federal election, the undecided is going to be anywhere from, maybe 6% to maybe 9 or 10% of the vote. So whoever can move the undecided is going to have a good chance of winning the election, because the undecided will usually split in favor of the left. Why? Because that's who they hear from the most. The left, being the media, the culturally Marxist left media, are the ones the undecided hear from as they head towards the polls. And that will be enough in Canada to win the election. We saw an upsurge in Liberal seats in the last election, but we saw the greatest increase in Conservative seats since like 1988. But what was the difference in popular vote? 2%.
Yeah.
2%. So there was the undecided moving, maybe there was 6%, and they split largely to the left some for the Conservatives, and so it comes down to 2%. So then Conservatives, realizing that, then they're faced with the issue, and some of them wrongly think this, well, what we have to do is bring in more and more left-leaning policies and we'll win the left over. No, you might get some undecided leftovers, but you will lose conservatives. So that is constantly the battle. And the cultural Marxist media will never put a conservative leader in a favorable light. For your viewers, if you want to know who the media is favoring in any election, watch the photos they put up of the person, either on the internet or on a newspaper, on TV. Look at the photos. The left candidate will always appear more attractive. Pierre Poilievre is a good-looking guy. Some say he looks fit, he's a stud, he looks good. But look at the pictures that began to run of Carney. When Mark Carney, and I've met him, actually, okay, shock your viewers right now. First time I met him, I was flying back on a jet with the Minister of Finance from Canada, Jim Flaherty. Guess where we were flying back from? Davos. The World Economic Forum.
Oh no.
Please. I hope
Oh,
you're.
you're breaking up. Stockwell, you're breaking up. We have to
I
go,
know.
everybody.
I can see your viewers taking that voodoo doll and going, eh. Flaherty and I were over there because we were opposed to the globalist view. We were opposed to a globalist elite. We were trying to bring the view of common sense on everything from, so-called climate change to massive UN policy. We were pushing back on that. Anyway, Mark Carney we gave him a lift back. He was head of the Bank of Canada at the time. But he sees himself as attractive, and I'm not knocking the guy. His first interview he gave when he got back to Canada. He said to the interviewer, and you can look it up. He said, "Yeah, I know. People say I look like James Bond." I went, "Wow." I might think I look like somebody, but I'm not going to be bold enough to say it. But he knew he could get away with it because he is coming from a culturally Marxist point of view. He's a globalist. He's a centrist. He's anti-energy. He's very progressive on tax. He wants to see increased tax. He's everything the media dreamt of. And so add that to the fact that even the media, after 10 years of Justin Trudeau, and look, Justin Trudeau, I actually consider him a friend, not philosophically, but we were MPs together. We chat a lot in Ottawa.
Mm.
He was very attractive when he first came out to the media because he was really far left, and he had the free weed policy. Nothing against weed smokers. A lot of them are my friends, and if not family. So, he was very attractive, but after a while, in the last couple of years, even the media could not hide the destruction that his policies and liberal policies were bringing to Canada, the affordability issue for young people, the lack of willingness to deal with, and I'm saying this carefully, serious violent criminals. I'm not talking about the minor crime, I'm talking serious, but the lack of willingness to deal with, again, I'm saying this carefully, illegal immigration. They couldn't hide that anymore with Trudeau. And then all of a sudden, overnight, and Pierre almost, the people saying he did to get a job exploding Justin Trudeau, and how his policies, not just Trudeau, but the policies were wrecking the country. And we were way up in the polls. Everything was going well. And in politics, you can never, the unexpected event is always possible out there. So you had Trump talking about the 51st state, which was completely ridiculous. Why did people say, how do you know about Pierre? I'm the guy who brought him to Ottawa. I hope this doesn't hurt his reputation, but he had led campus outreach for us when I won the leadership of the Canadian Alliance. I could see this is a super smart guy. This guy loves Canada. This guy wants to see real freedom across the nation. And while he was working for me, he decided to run for office, and he did a great job winning a seat. The first time he told me he's going to run for office, I said, "Yeah, you're well known in Calgary. You'll probably do okay." He said, "No, in Ottawa." I said, "Whoa." I actually said, "Lord, forgive me here." And then I said, "Yeah, I think you could probably do it." Anyway, he did it. He got it done. The rest is history. So what happened was, it's not a matter of policies. We were completely, and he was completely exposing liberal policies and really winning that younger vote, Gen Z, and up into the 40s, the people who wanted to get ahead. And then history happened, and Trump came along, 51st state talk, and finally the media with Carney could bring out a guy who looked attractive, and they always made him look, and hey, he's not a bad looking guy. I'm not knocking him for that. But you notice even recently, he's very smart on this. He's going a little bit with the Zelensky look. Have you seen that? A little more with wearing the black shirt,
I
a little
saw
more
that.
what Pierre was doing. Have you
Yeah.
noticed that in the photos?
Yeah.
So even in the election, all the photos of Mark Carney looking good. The photos of at weird angles with Pierre are not looking as attractive. By the way, they do this too for women candidates. If you have a woman candidate who's a small C conservative, and this is true in Canada or around the world, they will always work the angles so that the left-leaning candidate looks better and sounds better. It's not a conspiracy theory, it happens to be true. So all of those, and then what you see happening in Canadian elections, and you see this in Europe and you see it in South America, if you have the small c conservative, whatever their party name is, looks like they're leading in the polls, which they will, the media really turns harsh on them. They'll call them everything from a Nazi to a right-wing fanatic to whatever. But those countries which have managed to elect a conservative leader, look at our friend Avier in South America, who has said he would turn things around, and he has remarkably. All of these things, the media goes so hard that the undecided, remember, the undecided get shifted. So that's what they always face. I believe Pierre will win the by-election. I believe he's going to move ahead again. And it's going to take a while until one thing hasn't changed. Yes, Justin Trudeau's face has changed. It's now the face of James Bond. It's the face of Mark Carney. But he is an elitist. He is a globalist. And it is liberal policies that truly have severely hurt our country in terms of young people and hope. And those policies will be exposed again, but it's going to take some time when those policies get exposed. And it's through people pursuing alternate media or listening to shows like this, supporting alternate media. Just let me give you two examples here of media that make me, I'll say make me crazy. People say you already were crazy. To this day, when I was the Minister of Public Safety, I also chaired the Cabinet Committee on Afghanistan. And I went to Afghanistan a couple times. I went out on forward recon missions with our troops. They put me in, these armored vehicles. They had me body armored right up, and I'd be the only person in the vehicle without a firearm. Thanks very much. But we'd go out there. I'll tell you what, we have like the best soldiers in the world. They're admired by all the people we work with. The Americans love working with our Canadian soldiers, the other nations that were there. And we were doing stunning work. We were protecting Afghans as they were building dams to bring energy for the first time to agriculture. We were supporting girls who were going to school. We were protecting universities that were allowing women to be educated. We were doing fantastic things. And as you know, we were losing men and women over there. We lost about 150 of our soldiers were killed over there. And what I wanted to do, what I did while I was minister, every quarter, so every 3 months, I demanded from our people over there a report on what we were doing, the things we were involved in, any lives lost, all this type of thing. I wanted to show Canadians that their taxpayers and their soldiers were going to very worthy causes. I would call a news conference and I'd do it and give lots of notice. All of the mainstream media would be there. We'd have a big, and I would come out with the charts. I'd show everything our troops, all the positive stuff had been done in the last 3 months. Do you know what question I would always get? And they wouldn't back off of it. They'd say, well, Canadian soldiers are involved in torture over there, aren't they? It was a horrific lie. It was all I could do to contain my anger. I'd been over there. I went into prisons over there. I looked at our forces as they were helping train local police officers. Our soldiers were not doing that. They were fabulous. And all the Canadian media, and like you can probably tell, it just gets me mad thinking about it. And I'll say to their shame, and I'll call them out one after another. There were very few who would do anything except run a line on soldiers torturing. It was a lie. It was garbage. And the mainstream media doing it, Canadians started to think, is that what our men and women are doing there? So that's an example. That's one. I could go on the show for hours with that kind of bias. And then the other one, on the immigration side, and I have, new Canadians by nature are small c conservative.
Yes.
Just they love the notion of families. They love the notion of being able to make a choice because they come from countries where they couldn't choose. They love the fact they can work and be entrepreneurial. When they come to Canada, they start to find out that's not true. But they get terrified by the Liberals. So in the 2015 election, I was taking some of our candidates around, and we went into one of the Sikh temples, and I'm great friends with the Sikh community in British Columbia. And they said, yeah, come on in and speak to our people. They always make sure you speak to the women first. And the men are smart. The women are the ones who call the shots. And so I took our candidate in there and we made our presentation. And here's what they said. And I've told this to mainstream media. They won't publish this. A woman stood up and she said, Mr. Day, the Liberal candidate was here yesterday, and the Liberal candidate said that if any of our sons get arrested for as much as a speeding ticket, that the Conservatives will deport them and ship them back to India. I was horrified to hear that. I said, are you serious? Is that what the Liberals are telling you? And she said, yes, they tell us that all the time, that you hate immigrants and you want to deport us all. Uh, the Liberals, I will say, the Liberal Party can sue me on this if they want to. They lie, lie, lie to our new Canadians and to our immigrants. I'll tell you, the strongest proponents of legal immigration are legal immigrants. Those have
Yes.
been here generationally. And they say, Mr. Day, the drug dealing that's going on, the gang stuff that's going on, deport those people. Again, mainstream media never covers it like that. So those are the things, that's the type of battle that people say, are you whining? I'm not whining. I'm just about shouting out loud. I'm being very vocal about this. And part of our hope is that we don't allow the government, the Liberals, to come now and crush the hopes of alternate media like yourself. We've got to continue to push for defunding. I have said for years, let the CBC have alternative funding mechanisms. Let them go to the market.
Yep.
Let them raise funds. Let them see how much Canadians, let them be freewheeling on that. And even on issues, trade issues, I digress a bit here, but on the same token here, right now, Mark Carney is holding all of Canada hostage because Trump is saying, unless you do something, unless you adjudged your so-called management supply business in agriculture, we're just going to shut you down. It's been about it's been about 70 years that our agriculture community, there's other ways we can benefit them. Instead of having this particular approach, we can look at taxation, easing taxation for others. Other ways we can help our farmers and producers rather than having this supply managed system. I could tell as Minister of Trade, which is a notice to allies all around the world. It's not just Trump. The Europeans don't like it. New Zealand, first
Yeah.
time I went into a trade negotiation with my counterpart in New Zealand. He said, if you think we're going to have any uh, fruitful discussions on trade, he said, it'll be over my dead body. I don't know if that's Australian or Kiwi. I said, why? And he said, because of your farm subsidies. He said, we're going to crush you on everything else. So I'm saying, let's find other ways to help, and we can, our farmers and producers. And by the way, if US products come in, they have to be identified as US, obviously.
Mhm.
So Canadians will have that wonderful opportunity to only buy Canadian.
Yes,
There'll
sir.
be the Canadian eggs, the Canadian milk on the shelf, or the US. Guess what? Let's put our elbows up without forcing unnecessary impediments on all of our under industries, which happen because of our subsidies. All I'm saying is there's ways to do it and where our agriculture communities and farmers can thrive. So those are some of the things that we're up against. And that's why you talk, whether it's Pierre or whoever it is, there's always this impulse to just lean more left, to try and get the media to say nice things about us. Mainstream media is never going to say nice things about it because they are convinced that we are destroying community. And they're opposed to that. And that's the uphill battle. And your shows, one by one listener at a time, can start to change that.
I cannot thank you enough for making time today. We had a scheduling mishap off the hop. We managed to get this
And
done.
let me take responsibility there too. Sorry about that.
No, listen, it's fine. You're a lot busier than I am. And I want to say to people who are listening and watching that, like I said at the beginning of the show, when it comes to politics, it's something we talk about a lot. When it comes to politicians, it's something we avoid, unless I feel like we can have a politician on that has not only a strong point of view, but is someone that's not afraid to share that point of view. And I think we've done that today, Stockwell. I want to thank you once again. If people want to find out more about what you're doing, support the Conservatives, whatever, the floor is yours. Where should they go? Where should they look?
StockwellDay.com. StockwellDay.com. They'll see a ton of stuff there. They'll see a documentary that I was sponsored to make following October 7th. in Israel following that. They might be shocked when they see it. It's 4 1-hour episodes, and YouTube didn't like it. They put a disclaimer on it because they said there's stuff in there that, believe it or not, that could be harmful to kids with everything YouTube allows for kids. But anyway, that's just one item. There's a ton of stuff there, and they can find all kinds of links to, good shows like yours.
Outstanding. Thanks everyone for listening, watching, and take care of yourselves.